Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. This is a continuation of Esther. We'll finish that today. It's a short book, and the next one will be from the older prophets, Nehemiah. Okay, Esther again is Esther fresh. Esther is a Jewess who is taken as a wife to King Xerxes of Persia. All the times when the Jews were taken away from their homeland, and Mordecai, her uncle, uh, was telling her and letting her know about Haman's plans, who was a servant of official of the King Xerxes, or Emperor Xerxes, whatever it was, and planned to kill off all the Jews. So he had let her know about this, and she had thought up this plan to prevent that from happening. So Mordecai went away, as she sent him away, and carried out all of Esther's instructions, prepared for her plan to sway the king's command, because Haman had manipulated the king. So, Esther 5. On the third day, Esther put her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. Oh, let me turn that down. Loud. Pirates of the Caribbean. So, on the third day, Esther put her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to the half of the kingdom will be given to you." Obviously, he thinks very highly of Esther. So she was manipulating him in her way. "If it pleases the king, very humbly, say, humble yourself and be exalted." Kind of like this story is about. "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you, and what is your request? Even up to the half of the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this." I can imagine her being very, very humble in her request, bowing, kneeling before him. "If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them, and then I will answer the king's question." Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. He already commanded for all Jews across the land to be killed. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Haman was very ambitious, very jealous, envious person. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. Sounds familiar? Lots of people like that. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Again, when they impale someone, sometimes they were already dead, but sometimes they were alive. And they hoist them up on that pole, a sharp end, right on their butthole, and just drop them, let them sit. and just slowly gravity work its way. So they just become a shish kebab, basically. Horrible, horrible. Esther chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Mordecai, her uncle, had exposed some people, two guys that tried to kill him. So he just read about that and wanted to know how was he rewarded for this? And his attendants answered, nothing has been done for him. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So this is about humbling yourself, be lifted up. Haman, who exalts himself, being humiliated, humbled. The ultimate humbling is death. So answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. So he thinks he's kind of rewarding himself, not realizing that it's for Haman. It's for Mordecai. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. So Mordecai's really worried now. Like, what the heck just happened? Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So he's in the middle of trying to decide, what the heck am I supposed to do now? But he hasn't been found out yet. Well, he hasn't been exposed yet, I should say. But he's starting to get nervous. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining, begging for her, and so the king thinks that he's making advances. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, it covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending to the king, said, a pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. So, happened real fast. It's all about humbling yourself. Let the Lord lift you up in a way, in a manner, in a time, and a pace that He sees fit. Exalt yourself. So all these people in the world right now, this country and other countries, are exalting themselves. They're going to be humbled. Just trust in the Lord. I know it's just frustrating. Frustrating for me a lot. That's just one of the ways darkness tries to draw you off course. But the time is coming. The time is coming. Read Jude. Read the book of Jude, which is just one page, right before beginning of Revelations, which we are in. Chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had claimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, if he regards me with favor and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman son of Hammedatha the Agagite devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the poles that he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews, and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. And Cush being the south of Sudan, which would be Sudan now, south of Egypt. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses specially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Now, Xerxes is the king of Persia, which is Iran. So even then, the head of Iran, of Persia, granted the Jews their land and their livelihoods, and their lives themselves. So this is something that God brought about. God gave them the land. God gave them the land back. Gave them save them from captivity, save them from Egypt. So all this going on over there now against violence against Israel is against God's commands. So they're paying for it. They're paying for it slowly. They pay for it completely. King's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble, protect themselves, destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality, basically to protect themselves, or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers riding the royal horses went out spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. Many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Chapter 9. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. Late to today, the Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace, his reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. He also killed, I'm not going to list all these names, personal names. They're all enemies of the Jews, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. So they only did what they were commanded to do. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." If it pleases the king, Esther answered, "Give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." So the king, she's brutal. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. So they didn't rob them. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day of giving presents to each other. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrows were turned into joy, and the mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, P-U-R, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. And when the plot came to the king's attention, he has issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. I'm not sure what the month of Adar is. I have to ask my wife. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province and in every city. These days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. This is a good thing to say. Again, this lesson here is about humbling yourself, that God exalts you in His way and time, and amount, and not exalting yourself, and giving thanks for that, and honoring when that does happen, to honor God and give thanks to Him for it. These days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, as they established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim and was written down in the records. Final chapter 10, just one paragraph. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Lord, praise the Lord Jesus Christ. Again, just all about humility. Humility. Well, don't worry about all these people. Again, I know how hard it is. It gets frustrating, but nobody's here forever. And whether it's Trump, whether it's Musk, or somebody else, or someone in another country, wherever, in your personal life, everybody who exalts himself is humble. True servant, and look at them, how they exalt themselves. Trump, others, say God chose them to save their countries, to do this or that. Jesus humbled himself in every way. He's from conception in humility to resurrection in humility. All hush hush, all simple, all quiet, humble humility. So those who exalt themselves place themselves above him, equal footing with God. That breaks the second commandment and therefore breaks the first commandment. So do not follow these people. Do not follow these people. I'll leave it at that. Stay safe. Peace of Christ. God bless.